K-12 Budget Committee. We have a packed agenda today. As we get started, I do have an announcement, but Representative Owsley is not here, but I will let the committee know that I did find one of the documents that shows 118% increase in USD 402 spending for the last 20 years. I had mentioned 138. I didn't find that particular document, but I did find one school district that is on mine where it was 124%. In that same time span, the adjusted CPIU was 46.7%. So we will make sure we get these updated copies for you all, so we all are on the same page. Committee, we are planning on working 3 bills at the end. So what that means for the Parents' Bill of Rights, we are going to have equal amount of time for each proponent and the opponent. We also need to go over the bill itself, so that may take between 5 and 10 minutes depending on the questions that we have. That means that for the proponents, that's 30 minutes. For the opponents, that's 30 minutes. That means we'll be super strict on the amount of time that you have. That's 2 minutes of time for opponents. In addition to that, we want to take questions, but I will also limit committee questions because of time. We do have potential weather tomorrow, and we are at the end of turnaround, and that is part of the reason that we are expediting 3 bills today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with House Bill 2062, and I'd like to invite our reviser, Nick, to come on up and give us an overview. Have your questions ready, and committee, just please be as concise as you can.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. Committee, House Bill 2662, and you have a bill brief in front of you. This would establish 3 new sections of law to codify the Parents' Bill of Rights and the requirement that school districts establish parent transparency portals on their website. The bill would also amend the statute relating to the crime of promotion to minors of material that is harmful to minors, and the statute relating to the teacher evaluation policies of school districts, and we'll get into those kind of towards the end of the brief. So new section 1 of the bill would establish the Parents' Bill of Rights. This bill provides a legislative statement of intent in the early section of the bill that the parent shall have a right to play a central role in the child's education, to obtain critical information about what is being taught or provided in the classroom, and to take action when a parent feels that the quality or content of a child's education does not align with the values and expectations the parent expects and deserves. So the bill would provide that a parent shall have a fundamental right to direct the upbringing, education, care, and mental health of the parent's child, and would establish the following parental rights. And you can see those in the bill. They're listed in numerical order and in my bill brief as well. So first, the right to direct the education and care of such child, the right to direct the upbringing and moral or religious training of such child, the right to request, access, and inspect all written and electronic records maintained by a school relating to such child, the right to be informed of and expect the curriculum, instructional materials, and any other materials that are made available to or taught to such child in the child's school, the right to attend publicly designated meetings of the local school board, and the right to question and address school officials through designated public comment periods at those meetings, or through letters, electronic communications, or other in-person meetings with those officials. The right to make healthcare and medical decisions for the child, including the right to make decisions regarding vaccinations and immunizations. The right to expect that the child and each teacher and educator of the child shall not be compelled to affirm, believe, profess, or adhere to any idea that violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Similarly, the right to expect that no course of instruction or unit of study shall direct or otherwise compel the child to personally affirm or adhere to any idea that violates the Civil Rights Act. And also the right to expect that the child's school shall not contract for teacher professional development with providers that promote racially essentialist doctrines or practices that have been held to violate the Civil Rights Act. The right to expect that each teacher and educator of a child will endeavor to present the facts without distortion, bias, or personal prejudice. the right to expect that each teacher and educator of such child shall work to eliminate coercion that forces teachers and educators to support actions and ideologies that violate individual professional integrity. And finally, number 12, the right to assert any other inalienable or constitutional right that is reserved to the parent and the child pursuant to state or federal law. So that section would require the school districts, the Board of Education of those school districts to develop policies in consultation with parents, teachers, and school administrators to guarantee a parent's right to be involved in a child's education. These policies would be required to include procedures for a parent to be able to be informed of and have the ability to inspect materials and curriculum that are provided to the student, to inspect and review any educational or health records that are related to that parent's student, policies for a parent to be able to object to any learning material or activity on the basis that such material harms the child or impairs the parent's firmly held beliefs, values, or principles, and policy for the parent to be able to withdraw such child from the activity, class, or program based on those values and beliefs. Also, a policy to request that the school designate any book, magazine, or any other material that is made available to students in the school library, if it is not already so designated, as an item for which parental review is recommended. And we'll get into how that designation process plays out in Section 2 of the bill. And then finally, policies for a parent to be able to challenge the material or educational benefit of any book or magazine or any other material that is made available to students in the school library, such that a successful challenge would result in the removal of such item. So new Section 2, that was Section 1 is Parents' Bill of Rights and the policies relating to that. New Section 2 relates to the parent transparency portals and what has to be provided on those portals. So this would require the Board of Education of each school district to establish an internet-based parent transparency portal on the school district's website with a prominent link on that website homepage of each school district and of each individual school that maintains its own website. These parent transparency portals would be required to provide the following information. So on these portals, you would need the school would need the Parents' Bill of Rights, and then listings of organized by school, grade level, and area of instruction. That includes the academic and the social and emotional learning materials, activities, and curriculum that are used at each school. And this list would include the title, author, organization, website address, and any other information necessary to identify that information. It would not require materials to be published in violation of copyright law. A link to the curriculum standards established by the State Board of Education. A list organized by school, grade level, and area of instruction that includes the tests, questionnaires, surveys, and examinations. And we heard a bill related to these tests and surveys and examinations. And it would require that information to be provided, including a copy of those non-academic tests and questionnaires and surveys. Additionally, a list organized by school, grade level, and area of instruction that includes the professional development courses and training materials that a school provides to its licensed teachers or administrators of the school district. A link to the library catalog or an inventory of those library resources. And in this link with the catalog or inventory, there shall be a clear designation if parental review is recommended for any such item. And this parental review designation, if it meets the standard of parental review is recommended, and the definition is provided in my bill brief and also in the bill. If you look on page 5 of the brief, you can see the definition for that. If the designation would be due to sexual content, excessive profanity, or excessive violence, and then also shall provide a sample of that material that necessitates that designation. Also on the transparency portals, information on how a person may request and be given an opportunity to review and inspect any information that is required to be provided on these transparency portals. So the parent would have an avenue to request an inspection of any of these items. And then finally, the school district's policies that are adopted pursuant to Section 1, giving a parent a right to be involved in the student's education. So Section 2 provides that any book, magazine, or material that is made available to students in the school library must be designated as an item in which parental review is recommended if that item meets the standard under the definition for parental review is recommended, and you can see it there. So it's generally any item in the library that has sexual content in it. If it has an average person applying contemporary community standards would find taking that material in a whole, it would appeal to the prurient interest, whether it depicts, describes, or represents in a patently offensive manner some sexual content or acts, and also whether the work taken in a whole lacks serious literary, scientific, artistic, or political value for a minor. Additionally, if, as I said, if it contains excessive profanity or contains excessive violence, it also must be designated as such. Under the bill, a school district would be required to conduct a review of each book, magazine, or material in the library that was purchased on or after July 1, 2017 to determine whether those items necessitate the designation. The school wouldn't be required to conduct a review of any materials purchased prior to that date, but would be required if the school has knowledge of any item to go ahead and designate that item on the parent transparency portal. And then on and after passage of the bill on July 1, 2017, which would be the effective date of this bill, a school would then be required to designate any items that are purchased after that date if it meets the standard for parental review as recommended. The school districts would be required to post and update the required information on that parent transparency portal on an ongoing basis during each school year. And then all the information that is required to be posted must be updated, posted, and completed by June 30 of that school year. So at the very end of the school year is when the parent transparency portal has to have all the information for the school year that previously happened. So that has to be finalized by that date under the bill. Once it's posted on there, the school district would be required to maintain such information on the website for at least 2 years. The bill would authorize the Kansas Department of Education to provide guidance to school districts on these transparency portals. And finally, with regard to the transparency portal portion, the bill would authorize the Attorney General or the city, county, or district attorney or also a resident of the school district in which the school is located to bring a suit for injunctive relief or a writ of mandamus, essentially forcing the school to take an action to compel the school to post material on the transparency portal to comply with these requirements. And the bill provides that if a resident of a school district prevails in such an action, the court shall award such resident reasonable attorney's fees, but not to exceed $15,000. Section 3 of the bill defines commonly used terms throughout the first two sections of the bill. And then moving on to Section 4 of the bill, this would amend current law, and this law relates to the crime of promotion to minors of material that is harmful to minors. So what the bill would do is it would remove the affirmative defense to the crime for public and private K-12 schools. So currently under the law, the schools have an affirmative defense to the crime of promotion of material that's harmful to minors, but this bill would remove that affirmative defense. The bill would also revise such law to make it apply to the public make it apply to public establishments. Currently, the law only applies on the outset to commercial establishments. This law, as I said, makes it a crime for any person who has control of any such establishment to knowingly display material that is harmful to minors, present or distribute to a minor, or allow a minor to view any material that is harmful to minors, and present to a minor any performance that is harmful to minors. And then under that law, there's a definition of harmful to minors, and prosecution for that crime would be looking at that specific definition of what is harmful to minors in order to prosecute for that crime. Violation of this crime would be classified under current law as a Class B non-person misdemeanor, and that could come with a sentence of up to 6 months in jail and a fine of up to $1,000 for a violation. And finally, in this bill, Section 5 of House Bill 2662 would amend also current law 72-2410 relating to teacher evaluation policies at school districts. This statute provides certain criteria for the development and requirements of those evaluation policies within school districts. And this would amend the statute to provide that no teacher who is subject to these evaluations shall be negatively evaluated or have such person's contract non-renewed on the basis of such teacher's refusal to teach through critical pedagogy philosophies or against such person's sincerely held religious beliefs. And Madam Chair, that ends my briefing of the bill, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Nick. Before we jump into questions, make sure that your questions are specific to the legal questions of the bill and not into intent. And I would just make note of something that Nick did share with the emails that I received. I would say almost 100% of the emails misunderstood this portion, which Nick provided, which says that the information that is to be posted is to be updated posted and completed by June 30th of such school year. So that does not mean that it has to be posted a year in advance. It means that at the end of the year, after it's updated, it has to be completed by June 30th. So if there are any more concerns or questions on that, then I wanted to clear that up right away. So committee, for your legal questions about the writing of this bill, Representative Byers.
Nick, how do these parental rights compare to the rights that a parent has under the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act?
There's some rights that are already, for example, the records right, the right to inspect records. That's already provided under the federal act. But I'd have to do a review of that act in more detail to really provide a good answer to you on that, or a good comparison.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 2, line 37, it mentions professional development and training materials, and I'm uncertain, do those also need to be included in parent transparency portals?
Yes, those are specifically included, or to be included in the parent transparency portal as well. So on page 4 of the bill, if you're looking at the bill, it would be new section 2, subsection A, 5. So you'll see that at the top of page 4 of the bill.
Got it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Nick. In your memo, page 5, 1A, the average person applying contemporary community standards. Can you inform me of what contemporary community standards are?
Any crime is going to be very fact specific. And this would be something that the judicial system would have to apply. I'm sure there's some case law on kind of what some kind of community standards are, but I'd have to look and see if this law has been litigated at all, and there's been any interpretations of how to apply that contemporary community standard, and how that advances in time or changes in time. So I don't know if I've got a real good answer for you right now.
It was just a phrase I'd not heard before. I didn't know if I missed a definition in here somewhere. And then just another question. Page 2 of your memo, 5, the right to attend publicly designated meetings. I guess maybe that involves intent, because I'm not seeing why we need that in the bill, as I don't know any board that doesn't allow public comment section. But maybe that's one for the conferees and not for the revisor. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Wynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I likewise will have some for the conferees. But Nick, on page 2, and essentially it's, lines 11 through 20. Help me understand how this relates to the provisions of the Civil Rights Act of 64?
Well, Representative, I think the best I'm going to do is be able to just recite these rights that are in the bill. And an understanding might need to come for maybe the conferees on the full breadth of these items.
Okay. So then help me understand the phrase on line 1819, page 2, racially essentialist doctrines.
Again, I don't know if I'm the right one to be answering and providing, I feel like I would be providing some opinions in there. So I don't want to speak in opinions or give any opinions on these items. And again, it might be best to let the conferees kind of weigh in on those items.
Give their opinion? Okay. And then probably you had the same response, which is okay. Toward the end, there's some reference to, I think you said something about the critical pedagogy is where has, and it's a similar question, where has it been legally tested related to the Civil Rights Act of 1964?
The critical pedagogy philosophies or the...
Right, isn't this in the, did I miss, I think you mentioned it.
Yeah, certainly. On page 9 of the bill, it's under the teacher evaluation section.
Right.
And it prohibits schools from negatively evaluating teachers based on refusal to teach under using those philosophies or against such persons' sincerely held religious beliefs. Yeah, Representative, I'm uncomfortable weighing in too far into some of these ideas without maybe
Thank
just
you, I appreciate
providing
it.
some
So,
opinion.
Madam Chair, I'll ask the conferees. Thank you.
Perfect. And I will just weigh in quickly on a few of those items that you had a question on in the previous question. First of all, the Parents' Bill of Rights does not necessarily connect to the evaluation, so it's not necessarily a strong link. It's just an item that was added into an existing statute that deals with evaluation. So that's a separate issue. In terms of the item on that was asked by Representative Owsley, that the average adult person applying contemporary community standards, that's actually existed in statute, so it's not new for this bill. It was just included because it relates to statutes for the affirmative defense. And in terms of some of the other questions about 1964 and how it applies, I think it's just absolutely directly applying. You can look up the definitions for that, as well as racially essentialist. You can look up the definition on that in order to understand exactly what the reference might be. Are there any other questions? Make them brief, please. Representative Byers.
Thank you. Nick, on the sections that do refer to the Civil Rights Act of 64, would that also include the Supreme Court's decisions regarding that and how the Department of Education currently applies those decisions within its own civil rights boards?
It's an interesting question. So you're probably thinking under Title IX.
Actually, I'm thinking under Title VII,
And Title VII.
how the Education Department has applied that to education standards.
Certainly under Title VII, the Bostock decision. And I think the Department of Education has extended that to its Title IX sex discrimination analysis. But interestingly enough, Title IX is part of the Education Amendments of 1972 and not actually part of the Civil Rights Act. So the Civil Rights in Title VI, I believe, is the main part that it would apply to public schools that receive federal funding. And so that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. So
Did that answer your question?
That answers the question, thank you. So even though the Department of Justice has added this too, and backs up, we'll just be going back to the previous thing. All right, thank you.
And I would also note that different executive branches, whether it was the Trump administration or the Biden administration, interpreted that differently, and what the Supreme Court said based on gender identity, I believe, was related to work. But we can delve in that. Anybody can research that, bring that as a point when we work the bill. Representative Owsley for the last question.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the contemporary community standards. You said that that was with regards to affirmative action, and it's stated elsewhere in statute?
Affirmative defense, and it was actually existing.
So you'll see in my memo, Representative Owsley, it might help, in KSA 216402 on page 6 of my, beginning on page 6 of my memo, and then on page 7, there's a definition under that currently existing statute with promotion of material that's harmful to minors. That's similar to the definition of parental review.
So if you look on page 6 and 7, where it actually lists that out, it's referenced elsewhere, but it actually already existed in statute. We just kind of captured language that was already existed in statute. For the sake of time, we are actually going to go on. Representative Hoy, if it's quick, you can go for it.
Just to clarify that point, because on page 6, the strike-throughs on lines 40 and 41, they remove that affirmative defense for public, private, and parochial teachers if things are a part of their curriculum. So they could be subject to a Class B misdemeanor.
Yes, that's what the bill does. We were talking about the definition. So thank you. All right, committee, good job. I know you have other questions, things that you're going to want to dig deeper in. And so now, committee, we're going to go ahead and begin. Reminder that we have a clock. My timekeeper is my Vice Chair, Representative Hoffman. For our 3 oral opponents, they will have more time. If they take less time, then we'll have a little bit more time for questions. And so it's about 30 minutes for that time period, so keep that in mind. Between 7 and 10 minutes for each conferee will be great, and then that will balance it out. So with that, committee, I'd like to officially open House Bill 2062, establishing the Parents' Bill of Rights and Academic Transparency Act. Under our proponent testimony portion of the hearing, I'll open the oral testimony. We will begin by inviting Mike O'Neill, attorney from Kansas Policy Institute. Welcome, Mike. And by the way, we will have little cards to show you, and we will be cutting off. So please don't think we are being rude, but we will be cutting off.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Mike O'Neill with the Kansas Policy Institute. I'll probably anticipate one question here. We are not the authors of this particular piece of legislation. We're interested in this legislation as a part of what we consider a transparency package. We actually have sponsored legislation on the Senate side, which is a curriculum transparency piece. And frankly, in full disclosure, the testimony that we have here really is more directed to the general concept of curriculum transparency, and I'll probably keep my remarks to that because I was not involved in the drafting of this bill. Although I will say that I am pleased that for the first time that I can recall, an effort is being made to articulate what that might be, and I think now is the perfect time. With what we've seen nationwide, whether it's perception or reality, that parents are more and more involved and more concerned about what's going on in their children's education and are expecting to have more information. So we applaud that. I didn't quite know how to start out the conversation, but thankfully the Reflector did it for me. The article that appeared talking about the Coalition of Kansas Faith Leaders and Education Advocates, their opening paragraph on their article said that they're calling for lawmakers to reject legislation currently being drafted to ban or restrict teaching about U.S. racial history. I thought that I had reviewed all of the legislation-related bills because that's part of my job, and to date, I've not seen a bill that bans or restricts teaching about U.S. racial history. But that sort of frames the perception that we're talking about. We got one side that thinks that one side is trying to restrict what's being taught. The other is suspicious that things are being taught that shouldn't be taught. But then this paragraph is what I think frames the issue. More than 50 people gathered Tuesday on the first floor of the Capitol to rally against what they considered a concerted effort to dismantle diversity and inclusion initiatives at Kansas public schools. So apparently there are indeed some diversity and inclusion initiatives at the public schools, and that may be a good thing, but apparently they exist. Then the following sentence in the same paragraph, apparently related to that first sentence, one such measure would establish a parental bill of rights, creating a series of transparency checks to ensure parents have knowledge of all materials made available in school. Wow. I mean, there seems to be some outrage at the thought that there might be an interest on the part of, or a right on the part of parents to know what's going on in their schools. And so one of the things that we've looked at over the several months is, we've heard a lot about CRT. I don't even know what that is, to tell you the truth. And we know that there's been some efforts in some states. I think Texas took a swing at actually defining what that is and then banning it. And we have been convinced that that's not necessarily the direction that you ought to go. It ought to be more directed toward parents' right to know, so that they can make informed decisions about their children's education. This kind of goes hand in glove with some other initiatives that would actually let the parents do something about that if they became so concerned with what was going on in their own school district that they could change to another neighboring school district who maybe they're more comfortable with, or have some other educational opportunities. But at a minimum, even the federal laws that have been explained here, and I don't profess to know all about the federal education laws, places emphasis on the fact that there needs to be parental engagement. There's requirements of parental engagement and an opportunity for parents to know about curriculum. And the best way to do that in today's technology age, and it's actually a lot simpler than it used to be, where you'd have to actually walk in the door and go find a book and look at it and see it, which ought to still be available, by the way, but post these things. If a parent is not interested, they don't have to look at it. But as more and more parents get interested in this issue, and they became more interested, ironically, through COVID, when a lot of parents were actually able to see some of the online lessons and became engaged. I think that's a good thing with what was actually going on in the classrooms. And sometimes we're pleased and sometimes we're displeased. But the fact of the matter is, it kind of brings home I think the fundamental concept that children, that parents are the primary deciders of what's best for their children, and they look upon the public schools and trust the public schools are going to do the right thing. But as President Reagan once famously said, trust but verify. And I think we're at that stage that there's enough concern, whether it's anecdotal, whether it's real or imagined or whatever, there's enough that the need to verify, the need to have parents know what is really going on, and so that they can make informed decisions or have input or express concerns or have dialogue with the teachers needs to happen. And so I'm kind of taking a 10,000-foot view here and not getting into the granular details because, again, I was not involved in drafting. But this is an awfully good start, and we'll let you decide, what the final version looks like. But I appreciate the opportunity. My testimony talks about a lot of polls that are going on, some of them Kansas, some of them nationwide, that I think are very telling, and it tells the tale of the trend of parents wanting to be more involved. And even the the Education Week poll, where they polled teachers agree that their children's parents ought to have access to that information, and some expressed concerns about what was being taught. Again, these are just polls, but they're certainly trending in the direction of transparency being the answer to a lot of these questions. So I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time. The specifics of the bill, probably I don't have really good answers for, except that we are here to promote curriculum and professional development transparency.
All right, Mike, stay right there. Normally we take questions at the end, but because you finished before your 10-minute deadline, we have 3 minutes and 43 seconds if someone would like to ask a question right now of Mike. Any questions?
I might say the definition, that kind of long definition of pornography basically is from a Supreme Court decision that many states have now adopted as the definition. Because I don't know whether it was the
Miller?
Hustler case, the Larry Flint Supreme Court case. I can't remember what it was. It's been many, many years ago. But they tried very hard to define, what pornography was, and it becomes a long definition. I think Justice Potter Stewart was the one who famously said, "I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it when I see it." And that then became their job to sort of put pen to paper and tell us in writing what that is. And I think a lot of states, including Kansas, have picked up that language. That's all I know about that.
Okay. All right. If there are no questions from the committee, thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. Next, we have Brittany Jones, Director of Policy and Engagement from Kansas Family Voice.
Hi, my name is Brittany Jones, and I'm the Director of Policy and Engagement for Kansas Family Voice. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to allow that conversation to cease before I continue. Thank you. I so appreciate you allowing me to testify to this bill today. From Kansas Family Voice perspective, the most important pieces to us are the Parental Bill of Rights, and also the transparency piece of this bill. This is what arms parents with the knowledge of what their children are being taught and gives them tools to actually engage with their children's education. Because most kids don't come home and know to tell their parents what they learned in school that day. They often don't know how to express what they did learn, whether that is something good that they learned or something that the parent might disagree with. And so this bill simply arms parents with those tools and that knowledge in order to actually engage well with their teachers, their school board, and other institutions that are involved in their children's education. So at Kansas Family Voice, we believe that children belong to parents. They belong to families. They are not owned by the government. They are not owned by the educational system. They're not owned by the church. Though all of those institutions have a role to play in how a child is raised, and they have a role to play in developing and training that child to grow up and to be a successful member of society, that children belong to their parents, and it is the parents' duty and responsibility, that's a sacred and high duty, is to raise that child. And our society functions best when we believe in parents, when we arm parents with the information they need and the resources they need in order to do just that. So I am an attorney, so I look at this bill from a very legal perspective, and many of the definitional questions that have been asked here today are already defined in United States case law, as the proponent before me referenced, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions about any of those legal cases. I get a little bit nerdy on those questions, I'm just going to warn you. But I would like to specifically talk about parental rights and how those have been defined by our current U.S. case law and why they are so important to the scope of our society and the scope of who we are as an American people. So the first time that the Supreme Court actually recognized the right of parents was in 1923 and 1925. Now, those rights had been recognized for a long time in the common law, but those were first recognized in the United States in the 1920s. And this was specifically to arm parents and to arm even the schools to be able to make sure that children were educated well and educated more comprehensively. And we've seen this repeated in the 1970s and the 1980s, this reaffirmation of the rights of parents to educate and raise their children. This has had implications for religious freedom, has implications especially for minority faiths, who often have had those faiths trampled upon in an educational institution. And so these rights actually arm the minority to be able to raise their children in accordance with their beliefs. And we are a strong proponent of that. We want to ensure that all parents have resources and have the ability to raise their children according to their belief system. Now, I do know that, I've heard throughout hearings today, as well as other hearings, that certain opponents to these bills believe that this is somehow a violation of religious freedom. These bills are actually an affirmation of a parent's God-given parental rights and their God-given religious freedom. And so we are strong proponents of those rights and of the government reaffirming those rights. And also, these rights are backed up, and I referenced the question by Representative Byers earlier. These rights are backed up by federal statute that provide parents access to records, but as well as access to curriculum if they request. Now, where this bill goes a step further is it ensures that parents there's a place where a parent can go and easily look at that information. They don't have to go to their school board and get a stack of 500 lesson plans or whatever it is. And I would clarify, I don't see anything in this bill that would indicate that a teacher has to turn over their lesson plans. Instructional material is very well defined throughout statute and throughout case law. And so there's nothing in the way that instructional material is understood that would require that sort of material, put that kind of onerous and kind of requirement on a teacher. And also, when we look at the obscenity section of this bill, the Miller standard that I believe was referenced earlier, as well as the Roth standard, they're just reiterations of federal case law that protect children, that protect their exposure to these sorts of things. And there is a lot of case law and a lot of details that goes into those cases. Just like the revisor said, these are highly fact-driven cases. And so it's very hard to determine from this side what the exact outcome would be on that. The courts would have to work through that system. So we are, just to conclude, we are strong proponents of arming parents with information and knowledge to best interact with their children. We believe that children thrive when their parents are involved in their education. And we believe that the educational institutions should welcome that interaction with parents. And I believe many do. I believe that there are many teachers. I have a lot of teacher friends. They love it when families and parents interact well with their children's education. And so I believe as a state that we should be encouraging parents to do that. And then it's their job to actually take those tools that we hand them and do something with them. So we believe about empowering parents and empowering families to be the best that they can be. And I believe that HB 2662 does just that. So I would ask that you would pass this out favorably when the time comes, and I stand open for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brittany. You actually have 3 minutes left on your 10-minute clock. So Representative Hoy has the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your testimony references Myers versus Nebraska, which was a 1923 case.
Yes, ma'am.
The state had banned teaching a foreign language, and a teacher broke the law and taught German to a student. So, and the state lost in the Supreme Court, which I think this case actually extended important a precedent for due process for teachers. So could you walk me through? I think that this case actually could be an argument against a bill that removes affirmative defense for teachers. So can you help me how you think Myers is a case for this bill?
So Myers is all about parental rights. The well-established holding of Myers is that the parents have the right to direct the upbringing of their children, and that was reaffirmed in 1925. So that is the strong precedent. I'm not going to speak to the affirmative defense. Our organization does not take a stance on that particular piece of the bill. And so I'm not going to reference that or make any implications about that particular portion of the bill. But Myers, as well as the case that preceded it, Pierce versus Society of Sisters, were the ones that established our current understanding of parental rights.
Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that this bill goes to support minority religions. Would it be acceptable then for an atheist parent to come in and ask for all the religious texts of a school library to be tagged for review and possible removal?
I believe the way that the bill is written, and I'm not an expert on how the transparency sections work, so I want to be careful about misspeaking in that regard. But I believe the way they work, they would be allowed to have that interaction with the school.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think we have about a minute left. Yes, Representative Nguyen.
And thank you, Madam Chair. At times, people on this committee project what they think you said, so I'm not going to do that.
Thank
So
you.
I ask you to help me understand this. I know the definition, so I have a PhD, so I can look things up. So racially essentialist doctrine, how does that fit in your interpretation of this?
We take no stance on that particular portion of the bill. I don't have a definition for that particular component, and I would not begin to attempt to do so.
But if it's if it's related to the Civil Rights Act of '64 and how it's related to the major part of this bill, you as an organization you can't step aside and make a comment of how you understand it operating in this bill?
Would you mind pointing to me where in the bill you're specifically referencing, just so I make sure I understand?
That's right. Page 2, line 17. Professional development, promoting racially essentialist doctrines or practices that have been held to violate the Civil Rights Act of '64.
So,
You have a copy of the bill?
yeah, yes, ma'am, I'm looking right at it. Thank you. I don't want to be held liable for this response. I'm reading it along with you. We don't take a strong stance on that particular section of the bill. That is not normally something that we wade into as an organization. But my reading of that and my understanding of the Civil Rights Act is that we want to ensure that every race is treated with respect and dignity because they're, from our perspective as an organization, made in the image of God. And so I think my reading of that and my affirmation of that is that we would want to ensure that teachers are treating children with dignity and respect and how they talk about these very sensitive and hard topics.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it looks like our time is up. Thank you, Brittany.
I appreciate you.
We will move on next in line. We actually have, I'll get my glasses on, WebEx, Matt Byenberg, and he's going to correct me, Director of Education Policy, Goldwater Institute. Welcome, Matt.
Can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. Matt Byenberg, Director of Education Policy at the Goldwater Institute. Here to speak in support of the bill, strongly support the concept of a Parent's Bill of Rights, and in particular, the provisions of this bill dealing with transparency and posting the list of materials online. These transparency measures are particularly important right now, given the proliferation of political materials through K-12 across the country in various subjects and grade levels. As mentioned, parents struggling to be able to actually see what's being taught in the classroom. To illustrate the extent of the problem, just to give you in the words of teachers themselves, as teachers have reported in the education journal Education Week, which describes itself as the education newspaper of record, excerpts such as, quote, keeping politics out of the classroom is like keeping the water out of rain. We must take up controversial issues like racism, sexism, inherently political topics such as gun control or climate change, and every teacher is a civics teacher. Members, in other words, many teachers see that they have a mandate to bring politics into the classroom, whether that's history, science, or math, and engage in a way that often leads students to what they consider a more enlightened or woke worldview. The online transparency provisions in this bill would provide a mechanism for parents to ensure that political teaching does not happen in secret. As Ethics and Public Policy Center fellow Stanley Kurtz has written of similar provisions now being considered in state legislatures around the country, quote, a vote against curriculum transparency, in particular these sorts of online posting measures, is a vote to keep the public in the dark, to shut out parents, and to allow teachers to politicize the classroom. K-12 curriculum transparency should henceforth be a top-tier issue for state legislators and governors everywhere, not above CRT in priority, but alongside it. Many of you are surely familiar with the New York Times 1619 Project, an academically discredited series of essays that attempts to rewrite and reframe American history. As Real Clear Politics investigation found, the 1619 Project has, quote, been adopted in more than 3,500 classrooms in all 50 states. Even more significantly, and I think this captures the crux of why the provisions of this bill are so necessary, as the investigators found, the 1619 Project is, quote, mostly being used as supplemental optional classroom teaching material. By and large, school systems are adopting the project by administrative fiat, not through a public textbook review process. Members, that essentially means that Kansas students across the state are having this material assigned to them, but in nearly every case, the schools or teachers who are doing so without public discussion, without official school district governing board sign-off, and without meaningful parental awareness. Unfortunately, this problem is larger than the 1619 Project or critical race theory itself. As former teacher and American Enterprise Institute scholar Robert Pondicio has noted, quote, states, districts, and school boards have less control over what gets in front of students than to Google, Pinterest, and the lesson sharing website Teachers Pay Teachers, the top 3 places teachers go when looking for materials. Teachers obviously should have the ability to supplement their lesson plans, but this freedom does not negate the rights of parents to know what is being taught in the public schools. Unfortunately, parents around the nation have had this right abridged. The Goldwater Institute right now, we're actually representing a parent from Rhode Island who simply wanted to know what curriculum would be used before enrolling her incoming kindergarten daughter. She was told by the school district not simply to talk to the teacher or the principal, but that she had to submit a formal public records request. When she did so, she was told she asked too many questions, was told it would cost thousands of dollars to obtain that information, and ultimately was threatened with litigation by her school board and had the National Education Association step in to attempt to block her access to those materials. At the same time that it's throwing up such barriers, that same organization, the National Education Association, has expressly called for infusing ideologies such as critical race theory into K-12 curriculum, declaring at its 2021 National Assembly, quote, it is reasonable and appropriate for curriculum to be informed by academic frameworks, including critical race theory, and that the association, quote, will educate members on the tools and resources needed to defend honesty in education, including but not limited to tools like CRT. So given the routine denials from such groups that CRT is taught in our schools, which stands in sharp contrast even to the admissions of the NEA, and also the extensively documented examples of CRT throughout the nation, it's essential that parents be empowered to see for themselves and make that judgment about whether the content being presented to their students is political or appropriate. The provisions for academic transparency in front of you would accomplish this in a way that maximizes transparency while minimizing the additional requirements for teachers. Public school teachers already commonly document the resources that they're using by submitting lesson plans to principals or other administrators. In fact, as one union leader conceded in her testimony against similar legislation in Arizona, she said, quote, I currently serve as the vice president of the Arizona Education Association. Weekly, I implement lesson plans. I submit them to my principal, to my coach, to the district office. This is because I'm a professional. And members, this bill simply recognizes that if teachers can disclose the materials within the school walls, there's no reason that information cannot also be made available to the public and to parents. In fact, various programs already exist to allow teachers to do this at the click of a button. Moreover, in terms of the impact for teachers, veteran teachers right now who have refined their syllabi over the years currently do not start from scratch each year. They tend to keep track of what materials they've used so that they can use those in the following year. So this information is largely already compiled, and complying with the provisions of the transparency posting in this bill would require minimal extra effort on top of that. More importantly, for new teachers, this transparency bill would actually help them. It would do so by helping them see what other teachers are doing so that they can model their instruction off of the best and most successful instructors around the state. In fact, rather than having to scour the internet and search for materials, again, they would be able to see what their peers are using. A nationwide survey, in fact, which sampled over 1,300 respondents out of a database of 200,000 educators, found that teachers themselves report spending over 4 hours every single week, quote, searching for free instructional resources to use in my classroom. As those survey authors conclude, this enormous investment of time under the status quo is taking away, quote, significant time from analyzing data, communicating with parents, and diagnosing specific student needs. Fortunately, the online provisions in this tool would actually reduce the amount of time that teachers have to spend doing that. Instead of having to search for Google and the internet, they can simply go and, again, see what other teachers are using. In fact, in North Carolina, when similar legislation made its way to their House of Representatives, one representative opposed the bill out of fear that teachers would be able to copy and see what others are doing. As she said, quote, my concern is who gets credit for the lesson plans. I also think this would prompt people who are coming into the system, i.e. new teachers, to just search the website and grab the best lesson plans and turn them in. But members, we should be encouraging our teachers to build on each other's work, not spending time reinventing the wheel. As one teacher who testified to the North Carolina House of Representatives, which voted overwhelmingly in favor of similar legislation, put it, quote, this is a great collaborative effort for teachers and educators to find other resources that are effectively being used across the state and posting those and making them available for their colleagues. As a former Wake County teacher, 20 years ago, I provided all this information. I turned in my lesson plans to my principal. Doing it electronically now would be so much simpler than what I was expected to do as a Wake County teacher. So all of this is stuff that I had to do as a teacher that now as a parent I would greatly appreciate. Members, as that teacher noted, quote, I was expected to get every single media piece that I used in my classroom pre-approved before I used it and shared it with my students. As already mentioned, however, this legislation does not require teachers to get their materials approved in advance or document them in advance. It does not limit their ability to adapt their lesson plans at any point or prevent them from finding new resources. So members, universities commonly already document their resources and their syllabi online, and parents in K-12 schools across the country, for example, at the Great Hearts Charter Schools, can currently go online and see the individual short stories and poems that students will expect to encounter. So as scholars such as Stanley Kurtz have put it, quote, if you doubt that these transparency provisions are needed, recall that many teachers have promised to preach CRT to their students even if it violates the law. Indeed, already 4,000 teachers across the country, including educators in over a dozen cities and towns in Kansas, have publicly pledged to continue teaching their vision of racialized history, quote, regardless of the law. It's essential, therefore, that parents have the ability to see for themselves whether the materials being used in the classroom are appropriate. Members, more than 20 states across the country have now introduced legislation in the 2021-2022 legislative sessions containing provisions similar to the transparency posting before you. In several of those states, including Wisconsin, Indiana, North Carolina, Arizona, and Pennsylvania, the legislation has already passed one or both legislative chambers. So if you believe that parents have a right to know what sort of materials are being used in the classroom before they have to make an enrollment decision, or that teachers should be sharing materials as opposed to jealously guarding them to help promote the craft of their peers, I would strongly encourage you to support this legislation. Thank you very much for the chance to testify.
All right, thank you, Matt. We have about a minute. Is there a question? Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the testimony that you have provided, it says that teachers believe they have a mandate to connect with students, to open the eyes of students to a more woke worldview. Could you clarify what you mean by woke worldview?
Madam Chair, Representative, yes, I would say that involves a broad set of highly politicized views that I think folks who has been described that parents have concerns about this being something that is pushing typically a very progressive, left-leaning, politicized view of materials rather than sticking to something that's more academic.
Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I'm going to follow up on that same line of thinking. We know now after 100 years, the Tulsa race massacre occurred and it's factual, and that community is taking ownership and teaching it to its children. How would you assess that?
Madam Chair, Representative, we fully support the teaching of history and of historical fact. I don't think that there is any, whatever the episode, whether it's slavery, the Holocaust, Tulsa, Indian removal, whatever instance, there is, I don't think anyone who would want to say we should be keeping students from learning about history. That's very different from teaching that, for instance, students should come to view each other based upon a lens of race or treat each other differently based upon race.
Okay, so your definition of whatever woke was that you provided is not limited to, or is not defined, or, I mean, you use the 1619 project, an example that would not be appropriate, correct? Did I misunderstand you?
Madam Chair, Representative, thank you for the question. So the 1619 project, again, as it has been disputed on factual grounds by scholars, folks such as Yale, Notre Dame, Princeton, scholars, historical scholars themselves have said this is factually inaccurate material. So in that sense, this is not simply covering a historical instance that would be objectionable. This is to say your presentation of the materials are questionable. And I think under this transparency bill, one of the advantages of that, fortunately, it does not actually, it essentially says what we're going to do is let parents know that it's being taught. And if they have concerns about that, they're able to engage, right? It doesn't even require the legislature stepping in on each piece of material and saying this is or is not appropriate. It empowers parents with that ability to say, yes, this school is teaching the 1619 project. It may not be part of the officially adopted curriculum, but it is being presented to students, and that's information that's of note to those parents.
And I would respectfully disagree that it is factual. However, the interpretation and how it then has been discussed in academia is perhaps what you would disagree with. But 1619 occurred. So that is not a fact that will be disputed. But thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony.
All right, committee, are there any other questions for Matt? We'll do one, it needs to be very quick. Representative Byers.
So given the discussion we've had here and in your reference about things along the lines of race, if I as a Native American stand in my classroom and then relate the story to my children, my students, about the fact that as a child I was refused service into a bathroom, would that fit under that definition? Would that be okay because it's historically accurate, or would I be biased because it actually happened to me?
Madam Chair, Representative, again, thank you for the question. So I'm speaking here in terms of the transparency proposals. So that doesn't even need to make a judgment in terms of any particular issue. It just says, let's have whatever materials are being presented to the students, which again, obviously there is vast disagreement in our country on a number of issues, but to say again, rather than trying to, in every single case, have the state adjudicate this particular piece, the transparency measure provides a degree of flexibility that says, we're not taking a statement on an individual material, but we don't think that this is something that should be done without then disclosing that to the parent. So I think to your question, the transparency approach provides a solution that regardless of one's viewpoint ensures that that information is made public to the parents.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Matt. We appreciate your testimony. If I have not missed anyone for the proponent testimony, please note, committee, there are neutral testimonies that are on your agenda. And with that, I'll close that portion of the hearing. We're moving on to neutral. Please note that we do have one neutral testimony that's provided for you. And did I miss any other neutral testimony? With that, committee, we're going to move to the opponent testimony. This will be a little bit more fast-paced because of the number of individuals we have. So let me get my papers in order before I call you, because I don't want the clock to tick until we are ready to go. See here. Yep. All right. So Rabbi Moti Reiber, did I say that correctly?
Rabbi Moti Reiber, thank you, Madam Chair. Rabbi Moti Reiber, Kansas Interfaith Action, faith-based advocacy organization working on a variety of important justice issues. I want to refer you to my written testimony, given the crunch on time. I have a story about me being a religious minority, putting my kids through the public schools, and how I always found the Shorter Mission School District responsive to my concerns. And I also recognize that I am the responsible party. My kids always talk to me, but when I chose to put them into public schools, I knew that I was not going to be able to kind of control what they learned in the same way that I would have if I had put them in day school. And that was a choice that I made, and they came home to me, and they did education at the synagogue. So I want to say that from my point of view as a parent, 3 kids through the schools, most of the provisions of the Parent Bill of Rights part are already in place. But I want to speak more specifically about the racial justice implications of this bill. I think the conferee from the Goldwater Institute didn't get the memo that we're not supposed to be talking about CRT. So since he brought it up so much, I want to stress that part of my testimony. I think that the conversation about critical pedagogy, critical race theory, this entire conversation is a red herring, basically. It toxifies the teaching, the talking about race, and the experiences of people who have been oppressed in this, who have unquestionably been oppressed in this country. I think that it's very important that we know about history, that we know about the experiences of people who have been marginalized. That's part of being a well-rounded person. I want to point out what Representative Wynn has been pointing to, the conversation about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's inferred by the language in the bill and the testimony that somehow something that's happening is in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or promotes racially essentialist.
How about 20 seconds there?
But it doesn't. It doesn't. It's a false flag. It doesn't. Nothing is being taught in schools that is in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I want to say one thing about the transparency piece. I think that the transparency piece is making teachers jump through hoops, and it's for the convenience of people who want people who want their interns to go through the lesson plans and find things to pull out of context and to make a big deal about on Fox News and in the legislature. And I think.
Thank you, Rabbi. And I let you go over because you're a rabbi. So, all right. Thomas Witt is next. Let's try to stay in our 2 minutes. Welcome.
Do my best, Madam Chair. I want to talk about zombies today. Two sections of this bill have come back from the dead, Section 4 and 5. Section 4 was known as Senate Bill 56 back in 2016, and what it would do is it would remove the affirmative defense teachers have from using curriculum-approved materials in the classroom that somebody somewhere might decide are obscene and shouldn't be given to minors. So let's pretend you're a substitute teacher, and you show up to sub for a sophomore honors English class, and there's a box of books, Catcher in the Rye, and instructions to hand out those books to your sophomore honors English students and read chapter 1. And at 3:20, as you're on your way out of the building, you get hooked up by the local PD because you have just given obscene materials to a minor. Okay? That's what this Section 4 is about. It's about locking up teachers for providing approved curriculum materials to their students. That's what the affirmative defense is in the current statute. And this bill would remove that current affirmative defense and leave teachers liable to being arrested for teaching materials that are approved curriculum materials. Now, I asked in 2016, at the time my husband was teaching middle school English, I provided a list of the ALA's, American Library Association's top 200 banned books. And I had a question for the committee. Which of the books on that list can my husband teach to his English class that he's required to teach without getting arrested at the end of the day? Thank you. The committee didn't have an answer. Instead, they killed the bill, which was a good thing. And I hope you will kill at least Section 4 in this bill today. The other zombie part of this bill is Section 5. We saw this in 2014 with a bill that would have let employees of private businesses refuse to serve LGBT people because of a religious objection. I don't get 20 seconds?
No, we have a lot.
You know, Madam Chair, I just want to say one thing. First, thank you for letting me speak today. But, you know, we've had hours and hours of statements and informational.
Thomas, I mean, I would have let you go on for 20 seconds, but now you're going to criticize, and I don't think there's any point going there. So thank you very much. Okay?
Thank you for letting me speak. I really appreciate it.
Well, good, of course. We'd love having you. Next, we have Mitch Rucker, Early Learning Policy Advisor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Is this on? There we go. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Mitch Rucker. I am the Early Learning Policy Advisor at Kansas Action for Children. And I would refer you to our written comments for the sake of time, but did want to touch on how this bill will impact students, and particularly, I think, students in our rural parts of Kansas. We already know that there are disparities in the course offerings and the material that is accessible to students based off of where they live, with more affluent and more densely populated districts providing more options to their students. I see this bill potentially further limiting the access that our students in rural districts have to literature and other educational materials based off of the cultural or ideological makeup of the community in which they live, again, through no choice of their own. Additionally, I think that there is an issue for again, our smaller districts, you know, the ones where the superintendent is also driving the bus and sweeping up the court at the, you know, middle school basketball game, that these reporting requirements are going to necessarily take their time away from providing an education for the kids. They don't have a vice principal that they can, you know, turn this over to and have them fill it out. They're already stretched pretty thin. So in closing, recognizing that we have limited time, you know, we all want our kids to grow up happy and healthy and prepared for the real world. And as a state, I think that we should aspire to give every student the tools that they need to do so. And to achieve that, I think that we need to be promoting and removing barriers to challenging and thought-provoking materials, not putting more up, not elevating an avenue for the censorship of material that may be challenging or difficult to our students. So I would hope that you would oppose House Bill 2662. I would hope that you would do so in the spirit of letting teachers teach, parents parent, and students learn.
Thank you, Mitch. We appreciate your testimony. Next, we have Eileen Berquist. She is from Community Engagement Manager she is a Community Engagement Manager for American Civil Liberties Union of Kansas. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. There are a number of things in this bill that I know many folks will speak to. What I wanted to talk today about was the portion of the bill that does not set up a process for removing books. So you will see in this language that there is a process in place for a parental review designation, and that goes to the contemporary community standards that were mentioned earlier. But it doesn't set that up for removing books. So parents have the right to challenge the material or educational benefit of any book, magazine, or any other material available to students in the school library, such that a successful challenge results in the removal of the book, magazine, or material from the school. So that's a concern. Without any sort of process put in place, without any sort of standards or understanding of what that could look like, we do run the risk of schools doing things differently, standards being different across the board, and potentially books being banned on the basis of viewpoint or because one particular parent or group of parents thought something was inappropriate when in fact it was just something that they did not agree with. So that's something that would be of considerable concern. There is also the point of questionable language. I know that it has been referenced that many of the terms in this are referenced in statute or in case law. I think an example of this is the provision that affirms parents have the right to expect that each teacher and educator of such child shall work to eliminate coercion that forces teachers and educators to support actions and ideologies that violate individual professional integrity. There's no definition here of what coercion would mean or individual professional integrity. So those are some areas that would be very confusing and potentially void for that vagueness. So we hope you will take a closer look at those areas.
Thank you, Eileen. All right, next up we have Lauren Tysmiller, Director of Government Relations and Elections, KNEA. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you, Chairwoman Williams, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak, even if it is brief this afternoon. I am Lauren Tysmiller, Director of Government Relations and Elections for Kansas NEA, and I stand before you in opposition to House Bill 2662. Kansas NEA is a member-led organization that is guided by a slate of 6 core values, and this bill goes against every single one of them. If you read my testimony, I cover 3 of them: partnership, democracy, and collective action. I don't have time to go over all 3 of those today, so I'm going to focus on partnership. Kansas NEA believes that partnerships with parents, families, communities, and other stakeholders are essential to quality public education and student success, but we believe it should be just that, a partnership. Partnerships are most effective when they come with mutual respect and a shared goal, which in this case is preparing every student for success in an ever-changing and diverse global economy. Our educators understand that parent involvement is critical to the success of every student, and that's why they fully embrace it, and we have 2 here today who will speak more to that. While a portion of this bill is referred to as the Parents' Bill of Rights, it is not affording parents anything that more than a duplication of what is already available right now. Furthermore, there is nothing in this bill that could not be established at the direction of locally elected school boards as priorities or policies, with the exception of criminalizing our teachers. Instead, this bill will erode relationships as it will steal time away from teachers and redirect it to data entry on a website. Websites that will undoubtedly serve as avenues for dark money funded special interest groups to cherry pick information to use to villainize these very same public school teachers. Again, this is about valuing a partnership. We believe that the expertise and judgment of education professionals is just as critical to student success as parent involvement is, but it must remain a dynamic partnership that is not tainted by the interference of politicians.
Thank you, Lauren. All right, next we have Kimberly Straight-Vogelsberg from KNEA.
Thank you. My name is Kimberly Straight-Vogelsberg, and I am KNEA General Counsel. We oppose this bill. The bill is an attempt to solve a problem which does not exist. We support transparency and parental involvement, but existing processes protect these while also allowing teachers to teach. This bill upsets that, conflicts with FERPA, and results in increased confusion, increased cost, litigation, and also waters down education. Districts have to spend precious taxpayer resources on unnecessary administrative tasks task litigating these vague terms and in handling complaints from parents of both political parties rather than on educating Kansas children? How will teachers be able to teach basic civility, let alone survive a recess, without even being able to tell children to take turns? What's left in libraries if districts must face complaints about sex, violence, and morals in any materials? And if teachers spend all this time posting materials, regardless of whether parents even requested them, who is going to be teaching? How many extra teachers must districts hire? The bill's chilling effect is compounded by the removal of the affirmative defense to prosecution. Board members risk their seat, teachers risk their job if they have community complaints. That current system is effective, but this bill disrupts that by allowing any unsatisfied parent to seek criminal charges. Even if later dismissed, the threat of having to fund defenses against those charges will result in a chilling effect. Goodbye, classical fine art. So what's the end result? A more expensive education, certainly, but what of quality? How will Kansas students keep up with other states that allow space to develop critical thinking and debate skills without the threat of legal action? Kansas needs to be economically competitive. We all know how important quality local schools are to our communities. The bill does do one good thing, which is to highlight the importance of statutory due process for teachers to protect them against political forces. The bill is a shining example as to why Kansas should bring back statutory due process for all teachers. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Kimberly, we have Kelly Summers next, State Director of Kansas State Nurse Association. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee. My name is Kelly Summers. I'm Director of Kansas State Nurses Association, and likewise, I'm a BSN RN. I wanted to speak to a couple issues. First, the section regarding medical care and vaccinations. I believe that portion should be removed from this bill, as it then goes against the Nurse Practice Act of nurses having to refuse care, including emergent care. Additionally, regarding health education, we're taking into the, we're making an assumption that all families have parents, and that all children have parents, and that we're not taking into consideration those families, those children who do not have parents or do not have any family members. It is the right and responsibility for them to receive good health education from qualified individuals like registered nurses to teach such subjects as reproductive health, including using any drawings, or to be able to refer using anatomical language. And additionally, my concern also is with the use of textbooks. We need children to be taking science courses now more than ever. We're looking at a nursing shortage. We want to see more inclusion in the nursing profession. And so I have huge concerns, again, vagueness. Oh, shoot. I knew I've gained weight, but not that much. We're concerned about textbooks when it comes to vagueness of language in this bill. Is it going to affect a lot of the educational tools that we use, especially when we're taking courses like biology, anatomy, and pathophysiology? So thank you for the opportunity to speak here to you today. And I would also say real quickly that I would like to thank all of our teachers, because I know as a nurse, we've both been going through a very difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. No worries about that little podium there. And next we have Sarah Ersick, Good, President and CEO, Immunize Kansas Coalition. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm here on behalf of the Immunize Kansas Coalition today, and I provide my testimony both verbally and written in opposition of House Bill 2662. At face value, the Parental Bill of Rights seems to be a win-win. I'm a parent of school-age children in public schools, and I certainly understand the desire to protect our children and ensure that parents are in the driver's seat as it relates to their education. However, I think it's important for you as legislators to understand any unintended consequences that may result from the passage of this bill as it's currently written. Specifically, Section C6 would eliminate the current required vaccinations for school and child care facilities through providing a quasi-philosophical exemption. So while not providing that directly through amending the existing statutes, it would provide a platform under which to challenge the existing statutes. Current Kansas law requires children attending child care facilities where K through 12 schools receive certain wellness vaccines and only recognizes medical or religious exemptions. And vaccinations are among the greatest achievements in public health. Since the 1940s and new vaccines are introduced, the incidence of infectious diseases that once affected thousands of Americans have plummeted. Polio and rubella are gone, and diphtheria is rare. However, historical amnesia of the consequences of vaccine-preventable diseases have fueled vaccine hesitancy over the years, and as a result, we're at risk of losing measles elimination status. Considering the preponderance of evidence to support childhood vaccines, Kansas voters overwhelmingly support the current practice. A recent statewide survey of voters, which I've linked in my written testimony, found that 91% of all Kansas voters across party lines support the existing wellness vaccine requirements for children attending child care facilities and K through 12 schools. Further, the majority of voters in every political group disagree that we should add another wellness vaccine exemption based on philosophical objections. So in summary, we oppose House Bill 2662 as it is currently written, specifically Section C6. It's vitally important to maintain the status quo as it relates to required wellness vaccines for child care in K through 12 schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, we have Samantha Neal. She's from Bueller USD 313, which was my first teaching job. Welcome.
Thank you. Chairperson Williams, members of the House Education Committee, I am here today to express my opposition to HB 2662. Let me first start by saying I'm a public school teacher of 19 years, and I teach ELA, journalism, photojournalism, yearbook. I have about 6 preps. I am also our PDC chairperson and the 2018 Kansas Teacher of the Year. Most importantly, I am a mom of 3 boys, 1 who is in college to become a public educator, and 2 who are public school students. As I have been listening to this, there's been a question that has been running through my mind, and it's 10 years from now, who's going to teach my son? It is hard for me to stand here and not feel emotional because parent transparency already exists. I welcome it. We work hard to make sure that we are communicating with our parents. My son's teachers message through apps. They share videos. They have classroom blogs that my son gets to add his information to. Knowing that I am gone today, I even got a text about his presentation that I missed. When I think about the language that is surrounding this bill, and I think about words that I teach connotation, which is the feelings and emotions associated with a word. We're talking about arming parents. There is nothing about that phrase that makes being a teacher feel welcomed and trusted. I am a highly educated professional. I do not want any harm to come to my students nor to my colleagues. We spend hours collaborating in our building and with teachers across the state. Kansas has one of the most collaborative teaching professions in the nation, and I saw that as the Kansas Teacher of the Year. Parents have never had more access to what we teach than they do now. HB 2662 will drive away good educators, not because they have something to hide, but because this bill puts into question the kind of people they are. These educators are the people you sit next to at church, ball games, and stand next to at your local grocery store. Thank you.
Thank you for driving from Bueller today. Next, we have Madeline Swartz, private citizen. Welcome, Madeline.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Madeline Swartz and I'm a senior at Chaparral. I stand in opposition of this bill. I stand in opposition of this bill because I feel as a student it limits my ability to deepen my education. A violation of this bill took place in my first hour yesterday morning at school. A classmate of mine had a question on a term called racial tokenism, a term that's used in a book that we're reading. My classmate then asked my teacher who guided her to a definition, which led to a class discussion. This class discussion got a little controversial. We still kept it educational, but as a classroom, it got controversial and we kept it educational. We were able to learn from each other and we were able to deepen our education. Us as students were the ones that wanted to learn about these topics. We were able to discuss between each other topics that some adults don't even want to address on. As we were discussing this controversial topic, racial tokenism, one of my classmates had another question about who Malcolm X was. Everyone in our classroom was unaware of who he was. I see this as a problem where teachers are afraid to address situations in historical topics because they're afraid of what parents might feel. This is just-in-time learning when teachers all of a sudden have problems where students are uneducated on topics that we as students want to know about. We want to go deeper into this education. We want to know about these historical topics. I believe that this bill limits our ability to go deeper into these topics. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madeline. Thank you for giving your testimony today. We always like students in this committee. Next, we have Joel Addis, private citizen.
Thank you. Joel Addis, Madam Chairperson of the committee, members of the committee. Joel Addis, I'm a 20-year veteran educator of Derby Public Schools. The majority of my time there has been spent as an elementary special education teacher working with students kindergarten through fifth grade with a variety of exceptionalities. I also have 3 students who currently attend Derby Public Schools, 2 of which have exceptionalities and receive special education services. There are 2 items I just want to hit very quickly on. I went into them in more detail in my written testimony. Transparency. Transparency exists in Derby Public Schools, like a variety of our districts, in many ways. Our website already includes description of curriculum materials that are used. Parents sit on curriculum adoption committees. Academic tasks are posted online for parents to see, as well as the scope and sequence of instruction over the course of a year through their standard-based report cards. Educators are available to patrons daily through scheduled and unscheduled conferences, email, phone. If you are a parent of a student with an exceptionality, you have at least one IEP meeting a year to review their progress, in addition to quarterly progress reports. As an educator and a parent, I find the most impactful moments for students are in those small teachable moments where an educator can step away from what they have scripted and what they have planned and meet their child, their student, where they are at. Last year, I had 19 preps across every single day because of the nature of my job. And so if I, at the end of the year, needed to go ahead and put into place every single item I used in the course of my day, I would not have, the time it would take to do that would have taken away from the instructional time. As written, this bill takes instructional time away from students and is harmful to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Enjoy your drive back to Derby. It's real close to where I am. All right, next we have WebEx. So we have Judith Deedy, Executive Director, Game on Kansas. And a reminder, Judith, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the opportunity to address some of our concerns with House Bill 2662. We support transparency and parent rights. Parents already have more access to their children's education than ever, as outlined in our written testimony. We don't oppose multiple provisions in Section 1, other than noting they are already law or practice and don't need to be legislated. We object to creating an appearance that our schools are not already doing these things. Our school districts are already required to comply with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and we find it particularly troubling that it is apparently being used to question initiatives which seek to make sure every child has a sense of belonging at their school. We object to Section 2 so long as it does not include an exception for schools to utilize Google Classroom, Canvas, or other similar programs for parent access. The failure to have such an exception leads us to question whether the purpose of this section is truly parent access or access to outside activists. If districts are not allowed to use their existing parent access tools, this creates a new diversion of district personnel and teachers from the essential work of educating our children. We also object to Section 5G. We expect teachers to teach required curriculum. Our children's access to accurate educational content should not be limited by their teachers' religious beliefs. Taken in context with other bills this session, there appears to be an effort to paint our schools and teachers as liberal indoctrinators. Trying to help all kids succeed is not a liberal concept. We are facing significant resignations from superintendents and teachers and think these bills and their underlying accusations are part of the problem. We have students in these schools, and we want them to have good teachers and superintendents, and these bills are threatening that. I think I've hit under 2 minutes. Thanks.
Excellent job, Judith. Thank you for joining us today. Last on our agenda, we have Pastor Robert Johnson. Welcome.
Opposition to House Bill 2662, and I want to give some very quick reasons within my two-minute limit. Number one, I would just want to raise a question. What happens when all parents in our public schools begin to be assertive and engage in the process of raising questions and questioning teachers? This could have been done by many people from many different demographics who feel that the way history has been taught in the past has been biased and not comprehensive. Number two, aren't we supposed? I understand the concern that, and I think it's right. Parents, they have responsibility for their children. They have the right to protect their children. But what happens? Aren't we supposed to be educating our children to be functional members of society, not just their families? So if they're going to be functional members of society, then they need to understand how to interpret, how to understand and see things from the perspective of other people. Number three, the assumption that the way that CRT, which is not being taught, but a different way of approaching history is incorrect, is a biased perspective. Because I can tell you, as a person who was raised in public schools, that the way I was educated about American history was absolutely biased. As a matter of fact, I could have called that CRT or critical race theory. Number four, the lack of compassion and empathy for all children in our public school system is quite offensive. Because just as the feelings of one group of children that we're considering now, their feelings matter, the feelings and self-esteem of all children matter. And last of all, I think that in this bill, we are diminishing our kids' capacity to do what is one of the critical pillars of our democratic society, and that is the capacity to engage in conversation and debate that pushes us towards a more perfect union. We don't need to cripple our children so that they aren't able to do that. Thank you for letting me testify today.
Thank you, Pastor Johnson. Now, committee, I'll allow a couple of questions for any conferee. Is anyone wishing to ask a question? Representative Hoy for the first, and one more for the second.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We heard from Samantha Neal, who I think came probably 2.5 hour drive or so. And I feel like you had a little more to say, so I just wanted to see if there was anything else on the impact this bill would have on students and teachers, as you are the Kansas Teacher of the Year. I'd love to hear more from you, please.
I think the only thing that I would like to say about that is the fact that we are probably going to see quite an overturn in teachers in the next few years, and we have no plan in place to rebuild that structure. My concern is for our children and the way that putting extra pressure on them through bills like this that are not needed to be legislated, what that's going to cause. We already have transparency. What we need is collaboration with our parents, and we need those opportunities to do that without barriers and words that automatically cause anxiety and fear that we're going to do the wrong thing, because we're there to do the right thing for kids, which is to help make them successful citizens.
All right, question two, anyone? All right, we're going to go with Representative Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madeline Swartz, what motivated you as a student to come face this foreboding group of people and speak today?
I like to promote facts being taught in history and in the education system, and whenever I see them maybe being a little bit hidden because teachers are fearful that they might get in trouble for touching a sensitive subject, I find that as a problem whenever my classmates and I are less educated simply because they're too scared to touch that topic.
Well, as a high school teacher, I'm greatly impressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, committee, please take a note that we have completed the opponent oral testimony. Was there anyone that I missed? All right, good deal. If you turn and look at your agenda, you will find those that provided written testimony at your convenience. That is on the S drive for you. With that, committee, I will officially close House Bill 2662. And committee, we're going to move on to the next order of operations, noting that even with snow tomorrow, we likely will be here. We have a lot of bills that we will be working. If we've heard a bill, we're going to work a bill. So today we're going to get started with 3 bills. I wanted to pick 3 bills that were easy, if I could be honest, and I think non-controversial. And I also wanted to say what we're going to do is we are going to, with the proper motion, open one, then we'll open another, and then we'll open a third. We will not pass out until the end, and we will put them all together. We will bundle these 3 bills as one. We will take the 2512 will be our last bill, and we will bundle it into that. So please be cognizant of that. If you have amendments, we will work them one bill at a time, knowing that we will make a motion at the end for the combination. So committee, let's go ahead and start out with the shortest bill, the bill that was brought by Representative Estes. It is House Bill 2649. Committee, I would also let you know that tomorrow I'm not having my assistant Holly, who's been fabulous, bring any bills. So please bring your bills with you. These are just today to remind you that you need to be prepared tomorrow. So House Bill 2649, do I have a motion from Representative Hoffman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move that 49 be moved favorable for passage.
Do we have a second? We do, from the author of the bill, Representative Estes, and now we will move to discussion. Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the intent of this bill and think that we could do a little more. This has brought up some concerns that I have, as we've had conferees, for-profit schools testify here in committee. So I'd like to offer this amendment. Should I pass it out, or so the? Do you want me to pass it out, or is somebody willing to pass it out for me, Madam Chair?
Whatever you'd prefer.
Okay. Well, it might save time if someone was willing to. Thank you. Kansas doesn't have any regulations on for-profit schools, or I don't think any really statutory language on it. So this amendment would, it relates to consumer and student protection by requiring conspicuous posting on websites and materials that they are, in fact, a for-profit school. And it would make it so that no for-profit school can provide or offer any financial incentive, compensation, commission, or quota relating to the recruitment of students to attend the school.
Questions for the maker of the amendment? Yes, we do. Second, we have a second. Motion for the amendment and a second, and questions for the maker of the amendment. So Representative Hoy, you want a posting for profit schools, but not for not-for-profits, just.
Well, this would just require us to put out there that it is a for-profit school, indicating it as a for-profit school. This has been, I know, an issue in higher ed, and as we're looking at potentially expanding to the younger K through 12 grades, I think that for consumer protection for students and parent transparency, that it should be a clear marking if, in fact, it is a for-profit school.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Representative Estes.
May I ask a series, Madam Chair? Thank you. Is your bill intended to be just to for-profit schools online or brick and mortar? You don't have a definition of for-profit schools here, so it's hard to interpret what you mean.
Oh, it wouldn't be just virtual, any for-profit school. I think most are virtual, but those definitions would be, if you're not a 501c3 or 4, you would be a for-profit school.
So that any private school would fall under your Not all are 501c3s, some are and some aren't.
I would ask, the intent is well, yeah, if they're a for-profit, I think that this the revisor can clarify, but any for-profit school would have to post on their website and recruiting materials that they are a for-profit school and not a not-for-profit or public school.
I would consider this an unfriendly amendment. I'm not sure I want to tell a private business more than we need to as government and reserve the weight of force, and it goes beyond the scope of my intention.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Representative Nguyen.
Just a comment. I mean, it doesn't, I think the previous speaker is just reading a little bit more into it, just saying, if I understand, you're just posting on your website, we are for profit. It's just talking about transparency. It's not saying anything. I mean, the way I interpret it, it's, in the spirit of transparency, it would be transparency. So I don't see it as complicating things, and then all of a sudden to say a business is allowed to, hide its status. I don't think it's is as draconian as I hear your comments.
All right, if there aren't any other questions for the motion, we will you may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been reading up and researching on this a bit, and I think that having this type of language in place does provide transparency for consumers. And a lot of people, I think, would assume if they're looking at a school to attend, they may not consider that it could be a for-profit school. And I think this does add to the good idea for talking about the financial incentives for recruiting by also making it so that the staff doesn't have to meet any quotas or get financial incentives for that, because this provides additional consumer protections. And with that, I would close and move the amendment.
All right, committee, you have heard the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And those opposed? No. Noes have it. We do have Representative Hubert online in the Capitol, and we do have Representative Landwehr. For the committee's benefit, will you both show your backgrounds? One time is enough. Oh, would you guys go ahead and say something, and then you'll pop on?
No.
Hello.
We got Representative Landwehr. Representative Hubert, if you'll chime in again.
Hello, Representative Hubert here.
Thank you. Yes, we can tell that you guys are in the Capitol. When we do voting, we do need to be in the Capitol, and so just making sure that the committee knows that they are in the Capitol during this series of votes for today. That is important. So with that, committee, the amendment fails. We are back on the bill. Yes, question from Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, I think you already said this, but could you remind me, does financial incentive can it mean a scholarship that covers the free fees or a meal ticket?
So this would be something to encourage, entice, or motivate a student to enroll in that virtual school. And under the Virtual School Act, these virtual schools are managed by school districts. So I believe it would be intended to prohibit any financial incentive or gain, not necessarily, and I don't know if school districts even offer scholarships for virtual school enrollment, or it should be.
Well, whether you know it or not, if they do, would that be a financial incentive?
I mean, it certainly could be, but I think the virtual school, they get funded for the student under the Virtual School Act.
Right.
Based on the enrollment or the full-time enrollment or part-time enrollment of the student. And
but this bill would prohibit anything like that, additional financial goodies.
It would prohibit anything to encourage, entice, or motivate a student to enroll in a virtual school.
But is there any punishment here? Any enforcement?
I mean, there would be legal action that could be taken to prohibit the conduct. I mean, I presume someone could file an action against a virtual school if they're offering a financial incentive to for an injunction to prohibit that conduct.
And that is where?
That's not provided in the bill, but this would be law, and this would be required of virtual schools not to provide a financial incentive. So if they are violating this law, there could be a legal remedy through some avenue.
It's already in statute.
Most likely through an injunction to prohibit
Okay.
conduct.
Not clear, but okay.
This doesn't have a
least they know.
specific legal remedy provided for this
All right, thank you.
provision.
All right, committee, are there any other amendments for House Bill 2649? There are no other amendments for House Bill 2649. I would ask you to set it aside rather than go ahead and pass it out favorably. And let's move to House Bill 2602. Do I have a motion to overview that? Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we work 2602 and pass it out favorable.
Right, do I have a second? I looked at Representative Johnson first. Representative Thomas, I'll give you the next one. All right. Open for discussion, House Bill 2602. Representative Byers.
I think this is a great solution for some of our high schools to have low graduation rates, so that when their students are hitting their senior year of high school and it's obvious that they're going to struggle and maybe not graduate, they can move their kids at the end of first semester into virtual schools, and therefore their graduation wouldn't be counted against the school. And so we probably see the public school graduation rates begin to increase for those school districts that have virtual schools.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions about the bill or an amendment to the bill? If there are no amendments to the bill, then I'd ask that you take House Bill 2602 and set it to the side. We will come back. Finally, we have House Bill 2512, which will be the vehicle for our bills today, and ask for a motion. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move that House Bill 2512 favorable for passage.
All right, Representative Thomas, is that a second? All right, Representative Thomas is a second, and now we will open up for amendments. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have an amendment. Nick, if you could pass that out, I'd appreciate it. If you remember when we worked this, it was not quite doing what we wanted it to do. And what we're trying to do is to give opportunities for those students that have basically dropped out or disappeared from the brick and mortar schools, and trying to give not only the brick and mortar schools the ability to maybe find those students and get them plugged in somewhere, but also help virtual schools to educate them. So this amendment, if you'll look, it does change. One of the things too is we made sure that it clarifies that they can be 19 and younger, so that we didn't have, the way it was written is they could have been disqualified because they were, let's see, they have to be under 19, and if they could be 19 and it would have been disqualified for them. So you'll see that in a couple of spots, and then the major issue is where we defined a dropout dilemma completion virtual student, and so that will make them eligible for this new type of funding. So that's my amendment.
All right, thank you. Nick, I'm going to have you go ahead and go over the dropout diploma completion virtual student portion.
Yeah, committee, as Representative Hoffman said, that's kind of one of the key components of this amendment is, and you'll notice there's different ways that the student could receive this funding. So the first way is in that paragraph A, and this was the same language that was used in the prior bill. So if a student enters a program with a ratio of earned credits to expected credits for their cohort year less than 75% when enrolling in that virtual school, they could qualify for this per course funding. And then otherwise, a student, if they have dropped out of high school, such that they have not attended school district for 60 consecutive days or more during a current school year, and they're not reasonably anticipated to recommence enrollment at that school during that current school year, or if they have missed 60 consecutive days or more during the preceding school year, essentially dropped out during the preceding school year, and they didn't finish that preceding school year, they could enter a virtual program and receive this kind of per course dropout funding. Otherwise, one final option would be that the student has been exempted from compulsory student attendance by written consent of the parent, which is already provided in state law for students that are 16 or 17 years old, that they can drop out pursuant to written consent. And I will notice, or I wanted to note real fast, the ratio of earned credits, that is a requirement. So they have to have dropped out of school, have that ratio of earned credits, 25% or less, and then also finally not be counted in the enrollment of a virtual school as a full-time or part-time virtual student during that school year in which they enroll. So they would not have already been in the virtual school becoming credit deficient during that school year and then be able to enroll in this program.
All right, Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with the change of this language from the students enrolled in a virtual school, page 2, line 14, to adding it that they would have not dropped out of school within a school district, does this language now make it so that these students would be eligible for tax credit scholarships at these virtual nonprofit or for-profit virtual schools?
I don't believe so. I think the qualifier for tax credit scholarships is having been in a public school district and being a free lunch or reduced lunch student. So this wouldn't have any impact on that.
If the student would have been enrolled and would have met those qualifiers though, because before the existing language is only for students enrolled in a virtual school, which that language would not have worked. But now it's saying you would have had to have left a school and then enrolled.
I just want to add on that we don't pay for private schools for virtual schools. We only pay $5,000 for public schools. In this case, it can be a different private entity because it's dropout students, but they would, if there was any link at all, we would need a scholarship granting organization that is that go-between. They would have to be approved. So I don't know that it actually fits at all, but I'll let Nick tell us otherwise. And it's certainly not the intent.
Yeah, I don't see a link between this virtual school act and the tax credit scholarship program that would increase any eligibility or change eligibility with regard to the tax credit scholarship program.
Well, I didn't think it changed eligibility of the program. I think it could potentially make the virtual school a possible option for K-12 students to use those tax credit scholarships at the virtual school.
So that would go towards the definition of a qualified private school under the tax credit scholarship program. And a qualified private school, I believe, has to be an accredited non-public school that's accredited by the State Board of Education or by one recognized accrediting agency.
Yeah, and the conferee, I checked, they are accredited by a national or regional accrediting agency, but not the state, but that would still be eligible for a tax credit scholarship.
So, I mean, it's any non-public school that provides education to elementary or secondary students. This, again, I'm struggling to see because the Virtual School Act And the funding that's provided under this act, I believe, is only for virtual schools operating under a public school district. So I don't know how something would meet the non-public school definition under the tax credit scholarship program.
Representative Nguyen and then Representative Byers.
I just want to ask Nick or you, what is the estimated number of these students? Have you?
I believe that was provided in testimony. Craig may have mentioned it too. Does anybody remember what that number is? There's a certain number of students in Kansas right now that are dropouts. They haven't finished, and if we could find those students, then that would actually be a great thing. I don't have my testimony. If anyone has that, I bet they could find it rather quickly. Representative Estes is on. She's on it.
I have in my notes that there are likely 24,000 Kansas students between the ages of 16 and 19 who didn't graduate. That doesn't really quite give you, it's the best information I have, sorry.
And if it were fully used, you would just multiply that out by the cost per year, which is up to $709, I believe. Is that correct? No, what is it? Oh, they can take up to 6 classes, is that correct? 6 classes per year, so 709 times 6 classes per year multiplied by the number of potential students if they could find them. And certainly that is a fiscal note. The other fiscal side of the fiscal note that we can't actually measure is how many of those kids go on to the workforce and stay in Kansas and are productive. And so there's that return on investment. Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, my question is that if there is a student who qualifies for special services under special education, are we confined to the 19 years of age, or are they allowed to participate in this program up to 21, which is what it would be for special education?
So this funding would only be provided to students who are under 19 years of age on the per course basis. And I'm not sure how much special education services virtual schools provide, but that's the funding generally for virtual school programs. Full-time students, you have to be 19 or under, and part-time students, you have to be 19 or under, and then you are considered an adult virtual student once you hit that 20-year age or over, and then you're funded on a per course basis as an adult virtual student. So I presume they could be under the adult virtual program.
All right, committee, any other questions about House Bill 2512? There is an amendment. Would you like to close on your amendment?
I would. I close on my amendment.
All right. So committee, we have an amendment before us, and so all those in favor of the Hoffman Amendment, say aye. Aye. And opposed? No. All right, motion carries. And, okay, so committee, we have 3 bills with 1 that is amended, and so Representative Hoffman?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would move that we insert House Bill 2649 and House Bill 2602 into House Bill 2512 and a House substitute for House Bill 2512 be created.
Is there a second? Representative Thomas for the second. Any discussion? Sorry, I'm writing real quick. Did I miss anyone? Okay, no further discussion.
Oh, was it just, which one did you, can you tell me again, the motion? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm moving House Bill 2649 and 2602 into House Bill 2512. And Nick, do I need to say the 2512 as amended?
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
I knew what you meant.
It's a substitute, so it should be fine. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So we have House Bill 2649 plus House Bill 2602 that has been amended into House Substitute 2512 that was amended. Any further discussion? I think we went there. House Representative Owsley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe for the people listening online or in the gallery, can you maybe explain why we just put 3 bills into one?
Sure. One of the things that we have done historically here at the Capitol, certainly in the last few years, is pair policy with funding. And because education policy is going to impact our kids, we want it with the funding. And so honestly, it is a great way to have a robust discussion over the policies of education, and it is the preference of this chairwoman to do so. All right, then, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. And opposed? All right, motion carries, and raise your hand if we, in our minutes, would we like the vote count or just motion carried? Motion carried. Okay, if you want your vote recorded, then please let Holly know. Otherwise, we won't be putting well, actually, I kind of prefer putting the vote count in. Okay, so was it 4 in opposition? Okay.
One point of order.
Yes.
Are you calling division upon the vote?
Okay. Not necessary. I know that when we look at minutes, sometimes it's helpful to see 6-1, whatever that might be, but no, I'm not calling division, but if you want to, you can. Okay, then no, we'll just, the motion carries. Now, committee, are there any other items that related to this discussion? You have done an incredible job. It is 5:32, so let's make sure we're all on the same page for how we will proceed. All of the other bills are subject to be worked tomorrow. We will get as far as we can until I feel like we're at a good place, and then we will stop, and then we'll come back to that on Monday. Monday is our turnaround. And just for the record, committee, we do have one bill that is already blessed, and that's the bill that we heard yesterday. So, Representative Hoy?
Madam Chair, I believe the motion was to combine those 2 bills into one, but there was no part of the motion to pass the bill, I don't believe.
Yes, we did. We just passed it out favorably. That was the Representative Hoffman.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought
that was the House substitute of combine. So when he combined them all in together, and then I said, is there any further discussion? And then he closed on it, and that's passed out favorably.
Okay, I just didn't think he said, and that the subsequent bill be passed. I thought he just was to combine them in there.
Yeah, you don't have to say subsequent bill to be passed, but I think that's a very eloquent way to say it. Some people say pass out favorably, some people say pass out favorably, passes out, or there's a variety of ways in here. I'm going to just mess it all up. But
thank you for the clarification, because I thought there would be another vote. But anyway, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, actually, in all things, if bundles, larger bundles progress, then there's always other options. There's always another day for any of these items. Representative Wynn.
And based on our earlier discussion, since we don't know exactly what bills you will bring up, you will accept conceptual amendments.
The way that I accept conceptual amendments would be if they're easy and we can understand them and we're all on the same page, then they're acceptable. If they're such that we cannot follow them, or they're difficult for Nick, or they're difficult for the committee, then I will not accept them.
Well, that's logical, but we are clear thinkers, and we're going to be concise.
That's awesome, but I can't promise. I would just say we would definitely try, Representative Wynn.
Well, and I'm going to hold you to that because we are transparent. So thank you.
Absolutely, Representative Wynn. All right, committee, without any further considerations on our table, we are adjourned.